Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Big day in the House of Representatives. Back doing their jobs, about time. They move forward on passing narrowly the John Lewis voting rights bill, something desperately needed. As you've got states across the country doing everything they can possibly do to put roadblocks in the way of voters, especially people of color. This would undo that and make voting fair, equal, all across the board. All good stuff has to happen. Something has to happen, and soon, because our Supreme Court's kind of screwed everything up. There was some checks and balances in place until our Supreme Court, the Roberts Supreme Court, screwed up the whole thing, and now have even made it worse by upholding a pair of restrictions from Arizona. Crazy as Arizona has gotten, but 219 to 212 was the vote. Not one Republican voted for it. You had one Democrat representative, Jim Costa of California, who did not vote. The vote was 219 to 212. Going to see where this goes, because look, ultimately, dead on arrival in the Senate unless they do something with the filibuster. At this point, you're not getting 60 votes, especially when Republicans understand that they're going to have the upper hand here. They're going to, once they put into place those states that are attempting to restrict voting rights and put these massive hurdles in front of people, they're going to be okay for a couple of election cycles. That's all they can hope for. That's what they're planning on. So you're going to get nothing. You're going to get nothing from the Republicans on anything. Look, they're nothing. And in fact, today, House Democrats did move on the $3.5 trillion budget resolution. That's going to move a lot of what I've been saying. This is kind of a reset of Reaganomics. This is kind of undoing a lot of the really horrible stuff of the supply side voodoo Reaganomic era and the neoliberal era. This is going back to some bit of a social contract. This is going back to some bit of actually getting something done, something accomplished, and something we desperately need. I loved Tim Ryan, the representative from Ohio, who came out and on the floor today called out the Republicans. And look, something that absolutely had to be done. Here's Tim Ryan.
I thank the gentleman. Look, we see our Republican friends are very upset. They said, this is embarrassing. What are we doing? What have we done? What you're mad about is that we are delivering for the American people. We saved pensions, we cut taxes for working class people, invested in the communities, invested in the schools, and now universal preschool. Everyone can go to community college, vision, dental, hearing for Medicare recipients, paid family leave. If you think for 1 second I'm going to apologize for what we're doing, you are wrong. Once again, we should have done this 30 or 40 years ago, and obviously, once again, the Republican Party is MIA.
And yes, they are MIA. And this is, again, one of these things that I've been talking about for a very long time. It's about time that they start looking into going, hey, how are we going to rebuild that social compact? How are we going to rebuild the commons? How are we going to be able to make sure, well, that people have a safety net under their feet? And look, in the years where we had a strong safety net for people to try and do things, entrepreneurs to strike out on their own, things were good. The American spirit, that entrepreneurial spirit was there. It was strong. Now we're in this position where, if you try and you fail, it's a long, hard down. So for me, I'm glad to see that we're finally starting to do something, addressing some of the things that have been allowed to destroy us, creating, again, that massive gulf between the haves and the rest of us. That vote went party line vote, 220 to 212. That is, there are 220 Democrats in the House, 212 Republicans. That was the party line vote. And, at the end of this, we've got to hold those accountable who voted for this and against it. Praise those who voted for it. And, well, come election time, remember, every Republican voted against it. Now, is this gonna meet challenges? Yeah, it's gonna meet challenges. In fact, today I woke up to the unmovable 9, or and then it turned into 10. There were 10 centrist Democrats who were saying, no, too much. They wanted, as I understand, to move the bipartisan bill by September 27th, which is really quick. Now, this again is trying to push Nancy Pelosi's hand, so that they get the bipartisan one first, and then you give cover to the moderates who go, well, we got what we wanted, nothing for you. And the centrists are the ones causing this rift right now, because this was out of nowhere. And, the rest of the party's like, whoa, wait a second, we had a deal and you've now blown this up. There was some fairly coarse language when asked what folks thought of the Mystery 9, which, not surprising. But as you look through some of the names on the list, not surprising. And the thing that gets me is most of them were in fairly safe districts. It's not a matter of you have to take this vote because, back home I might take some heat. No. More than half of them were in fairly safe districts. This was not going to be a bad thing. Now, look, if we get nothing, I'd say a good number of them, they're going to be on the target list. And those seats could flip. And if in a year when we come up to the next election and nothing gets done because of this, same thing with Christian Cinema. Because, again, this $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill is a major uphill climb. It may not get through the Senate, but today you had that drama. And it was just, in fact, it was so bad that Mitch McConnell actually gave his seal of approval, wishing them much success. Because he knows, look, if you could cause this crisis, if you can cause this delay, you can cause people to be at each other's throat, nothing gets done. And if nothing gets done, they win. If Biden can't go back to the American people and go, look what I've done. Look at what we have accomplished. Right now he's taking some heat because of what's going on in Afghanistan. Again, everything that's going on in Afghanistan with this exit right now is on Trump's lap. And every day we're finding out more and more about just how bad a deal Trump made. Again, Mr. Art of the Bad Deal. We're now finding out just how bad it was. And look, I give Biden credit. Stick to your guns, gather the sheep, get the flock out. We do need to get the people out who helped us, without question. But we need to get out. Now, if the international community wants to go rush in, and that's on them. We've been there 20 years. Time to get out. Now, for the folks who are saying $3.5 trillion, Rick, that's a lot of money. And you go, yeah, it is. It's a lot of money. And you add that to the $1.2 trillion hard infrastructure bill, you're looking at what, $4.7 trillion? The American Society of Civil Engineers says just in our infrastructure, our ports, our bridges, our airports, our waterways, all of our what are considered our infrastructure, all of that, we need about $4.6 trillion. So to say, oh, that's it's too much, it's not enough. Not enough. And I know. But Rick, we don't have the money. We're all broke. Nobody's got any money. I reach into my pocket and there's lint. Nothing. Well, our billionaires have money. In fact, they got lots of it. In fact, thanks to the pandemic, their wealth has gone up 62% just during the pandemic. Our heavy 700, because now we've got more than 700 billionaires, up from 6 something. And look, this should be a source of national pride. There's part of me that goes, you know what? We have sacrificed. We have given of ourselves, our blood, our sweat, our tears, our hopes, and our dreams. We've given all that up so that we could have these billionaires. We could have someone like Jeff Bezos play with his phallic-looking rocket in the sky. He could build a giant bathtub boat. Look at all of the things that we should share in. In fact, Jeff Bezos himself said thank you to the employees and to the customers who have sacrificed so much so that he could have just a little bit more. And the thing that gets me is again, we keep hearing, we don't have the money. And yet during the pandemic, just during the pandemic, the wealthiest Americans, our heavy 700, their wealth increased by $1.8 trillion. I mean, if there's never been a time for a wealth tax more than there is now, I don't know when that would be. If there were ever a time for a crisis tax, a pandemic tax, if you will, saying, look, there are people who are about ready to get evicted from their homes, but somehow your wealth went up 62%, and we gave you massive tax cuts, and you're paying a lower tax rate than those quote unquote heroes, because we love throwing names on people. All those essential workers who showed up to make you those profits, who are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week for poverty wages so that you could have your toys, and you don't want to share? Are you freaking kidding me? There's so much we should be doing. The first part of it is a wealth tax. The second part is, start talking about going back to the Eisenhower tax code. I know Americans for Tax Fairness are going, no, we should go back to the 39.6% rate so that we could, bring a bunch of $370 billion in to help pay it. No. Enough of that. Forget that. We're beyond that. It's time to go back at least to the tax code when Reagan took office of 70%. At least start talking there. Also need to talk about corporate taxes. Again, we've lowered it from 35 all the way down to 21, even though no one paid the 35. Average tax rate was about 14%. It's yet now even lower than that. Because again, we didn't do anything to close the loopholes. So you've got these big companies who are just lining their pockets. We could raise almost $1 trillion by returning to a sane corporate tax code. And close off the loopholes, close off the territorial offshoring stuff that they did, that Trump and his buddies did. We could bring in another $1 trillion. We could pay for the entire $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill by just undoing all of the lobbying that corporate America and the very wealthy have done over the last 20 years. Let that sink in for a minute. If we just tax the wealthy like we tax working people, I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And these are the folks who we've given so much. And I always, whenever I talk about this stuff, it's always, who's your favorite billionaire? Because, maybe I'm hoping someday someone will take my advice and go, we should have billionaire trading cards. I mean, if we've, spent our entire lives working for lower wages, if we've spent our entire lives seeing our retirement security evaporate before our very eyes, if we've seen our health security go away, at least we should be able to share vicariously through some of the major achievements of our billionaire class, our national treasures, our true heroes, our captains of industry. We should be able to, at least a little bit, like all the people who, because I always say it all the time, my favorite billionaire is a guy named Stephen Schatz Biscotti. Schatz made his money the old-fashioned way, shipping jobs overseas. Don't you think all the people who lost their jobs should at least be able to share a little bit in the fact that they created this billionaire through their sacrifice and through their family loss? Just a little bit. And now look, I'm being majorly sarcastic here. But on some level, do we not have to hold these folks accountable somehow? I look at the $3.5 trillion number and I go, it's a big number. It really is. But the fact that we haven't done any of this stuff, much like Tim Ryan said, this stuff should have been done 30, 40 years ago. This is stuff that should have already happened. These are things that people have been demanding and calling for decades. And yet all we end up getting is more short end of the stick. Longer hours, less pay, less health care, less. And this is a moment, and good on the Democrats for finally seizing this. Good on Nancy Pelosi. I mean, today Nancy Pelosi showed that she has some power. Because everyone's like, well, she's not going to be able to pull them together. They're going to, this is going to implode. It's going to all be bad. No, she pulled it together, and every Democrat voted for it. Conversely, on the other side, every Republican voted against it. So you have to start asking yourself, who's on your side? The fact that we are talking about making college more affordable. Look, as a parent who's got, kids, going eventually to have to go to college, talking my language. As other parents that I know looking down the road, how do we make college more affordable? How do we make sure that our kids have the future that we want for them? Because over the last 20 years, we've saddled them with a lifetime of debt. How do we make sure that as we get into our final years that we get the Medicare and the health care that we need? The long-term health care, which is going to be, catastrophic in the next decade. This starts to look at that stuff. And no, I'm not even talking about the climate side of things. I'm not even talking about the investments in green energy and the investments in what will be my grandchildren looking back going, oh yeah, they weren't complete idiots. This is our attempt at a legacy. And all the right can do, all I see from the right now is Joe Biden's collapsing. His polling numbers are bad. All because of stuff that he inherited from the former guy. Now look, Afghanistan is a lot of people with a lot of bad decisions. But the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm looking at the former guy's decision to put the May 1st deadline, some of the things that he did, the releasing of Taliban fighters, the releasing of the new guy who's in charge, a lot of the deals that they made, very, very suspect, questionable, and I'm hoping at some point investigatable. But we're going to see. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day striking Teamsters in Minneapolis defied martial law. They stopped scab trucks, forcing the release of their strike leaders. Armed with bayonets and machine guns, the National Guard had patrolled the streets for nearly a week. They seized scores of strikers and union leaders and threw them into military stockades. Drivers were outraged. They defied Governor Olson and Major General Walsh, who, on behalf of the Citizens Alliance and trucking bosses, were determined to break the strike. Soon after strikers were imprisoned, drivers began chasing scab trucks across the city. Multiple reports poured in of picketers forcing trucks to stop. Some unloaded their cargo onto bridges. Others chased, captured, and damaged the scab trucks. Strikers ripped ignition wires out, forced scabs from the wheel, and then disappeared before police and the National Guard could arrive to retaliate. In just 3 hours, strikers had overturned nearly 70 trucks. Unable to stop the superior force of striking drivers, Bill Brown, Vincent, and Miles Dunn were ordered unconditionally released from the military stockades. Now, employers, the governor, and other strike-breaking agencies were eager to propose peace to federal mediators. But they proposed to scrap the terms of their earlier May agreement. In response, the leaders of Local 574 issued a general strike call. In it, they asked, quote, "Is there one man so blind as not to see that if 574 is allowed to go down to defeat under the brutal hammering of military despotism, the whole labor movement of the city will have been dealt a mortal blow? Union men, brothers, sisters, fellow workers, what are you going to do about it?" we appeal to you for solidarity. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So good on Ohio State University. Today they announced that everyone, students, faculty, staff, everyone vaccinated. Basically, get vaxxed or get lost. And look, I think we're going to have to get to this point. As loud as obnoxious the anti-vaxxers and the right-wing crazies are, the Abbotts and the DeSantises of the world, as loud as they are, I think it's time for the sane side to go, sit down and shut up. Now that Ohio State's done this, I got to wonder how Ohio Congressman Warren Davidson's taking this. Because you may remember, Warren had his bill to ban the vaccine passports. In fact, he was pushing this idea, that the left is trying to impose critical health theory on us. See what he did there? See? They got critical, they got theory, dog whistle politics, because a little thing to the critical race theory. Aha! Here to talk a little bit about what that actually is, since none of them can actually explain either to me. I've asked Hasan Jeffries to come talk with us. Hasan is a associate professor of history there at the Ohio State University. Hasan has done a fabulous TED Talk that every person should actually watch if you want to know what critical race theory is. Hasan, thanks for taking time for us.
Great, Rick. It's great to be with you.
So, I'm looking at this congressman from Ohio who's critical health theory, Hasan. Basically just more dog whistle trying to scare people into thinking that this is something that, well, the left is trying to impose on them. Kind of like education.
Yeah, what we're in the midst of is, in a way, not very unfamiliar, especially when it comes to thinking about critical race theory. It's these culture wars that are racialized. We go back to the early 70s, and it's, the left is coming for your unborn children. In the 80s, the left was coming for your guns. Early 2000s, the left is coming from your Bibles. Of course, remember 2004 and Trump drumming up the riling people around gay marriage. And now with critical race theory, it's the left. They're coming for your children. And for, many white people, it's frightening, but it's fantasy. And the radical right, even the conservative right, they understand that ginning up and animating those who were most animated by Trump's racism, the way to do that is to feed them some nonsense about racism and people trying to come get their children and indoctrination. So this is all politics through and through. And unfortunately, it's the kids who suffer.
And it's fear. I mean, fear is the one thing that sells the best. If you can scare people, like you said, they're coming for your children. They're taking your country away. They're rewriting your history that, to be honest, was sugar-coated at best. And I think in your TED Talk, you went through some of this stuff, which I think is important. Look, I'm a big fan of actual history. Tell me the truth. I don't want fantasy. I want the truth.
And our kids want the same thing. I teach them at Ohio State, as you mentioned. And when my students, who are mostly white, coming from all parts of Ohio and really all over the United States, they come in. And when we talk about the unvarnished truth, and they are like, wait a minute, how come nobody told me this before? Right? They don't run in a corner like, no, I don't want to hear this. Right? This is exactly what they want to hear. And as educators, really, we're creating good citizens when we talk about the past honestly. It's not easy. You're right. This is not the Disney version of history where everything is nice, neat, and the enemies are easily identified and the like. No. This is just the way things were. And a lot of times it makes us uncomfortable, but that's fine. You learn from discomfort. We have to lean into our discomfort. It's the only way that we can move forward.
No, you're absolutely right. Back in 2015, our program did a civil rights tour. We're a labor-based program, and I wanted to look at labor's participation in the civil rights movement. And it all came out of, one of those conversations you have with your kids when they come home from school. And my oldest daughter had come home from school, and I said, "What'd you learn today?" And she goes, "Well, we learned about Rosa Parks." And I go, "Well, what'd you learn?" She was tired. You know, she sat on the bus and she was tired. And I'm going, there's a lot more to this. So out of this idea was we're gonna go and we're gonna investigate history. We're gonna go to the places where this stuff happened. And what I found, honestly, is all of the horrible things that we've done to people of color, there are now museums for. It is now turned into kind of a capitalist dream to where, hey, we did some really horrible things to people. Let's have a museum and cash in.
Yeah. Historical tourism is a thriving industry, and some states have done it better than others, right? I mean, Alabama and Mississippi have really leaned into it. And everything has a positive and a negative. It's important that we shine a light on this history, so not just that so that we don't forget it, but that so we don't continue doing the same things that led to sort of inequality in the past. And so it's important to have that. But you're right, we don't want to reduce it to Walt Disney. We want to take it seriously so that we can learn from those lessons, and again, not continue to do those things. So it's we want to have a museum about the institution of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade and the Black freedom struggle and to lynching, and so that we don't forget it, so that we can understand what exactly happened. But we don't want to leave it in the hands of sort of state legislators who are like, hey, this is the good way to turn a quick buck.
No, and the reason I bring this up is, there was a moment during one of the museum tours that we got to take in Birmingham, Alabama. Right across from the 16th Street Baptist Church where the bombing happened is the International Civil Rights Museum, and it's one of the best one out there. And in this little display case, they had this little clutch purse that had like the tissues and like a little lipstick thing, a little pendant, and all of this stuff was horrible to me, and you're horrified by seeing all this stuff. It wasn't until I saw that, something that my daughter, who was about the same age as these girls who died in that bombing were, that it really hit home and made it real for me. And it caught me because you had said something in your TED talk about touching the bricks of Monticello, where that you knew had the slave handprints in it, and that being part of the history. It's that kind of stuff that I think connects with people.
It's the power of place. We can talk about this history, we can read about it, we can watch documentary films about it, and can learn a lot in those ways. But there is no substitute for being in the place itself. And so the civil rights tour, like you said, that you went on, anybody can go on. There's history everywhere. And there are places where history happened, which is so critically important, and important history. And sometimes it's the simplest things that allow us to have that human connection that we so often lack when it comes to trying to connect, trying to empathize, not with those in power and those with prestige, but those who are marginalized, those who have been oppressed. We teach our children, for example, when we think about teaching slavery, we teach our children to empathize with enslavers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. We celebrate those folk who were enslavers, founders, of course, but enslavers as well. We teach our children to empathize with enslaved and not with the enslaved. And that carries forward, where it becomes easier to see yourself in a billionaire than it is in someone from the working class.
No, that is quite remarkable. And these last couple of years to me have been very, very hard to deal with that there are people who think that the former guy has their interests at heart, when the reality is there's a long history of not. Now, I'm sure after giving this TED talk, which again I hope folks will take a look at, and we'll get out on social media so people can take a look at it. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of arrows thrown your way, a lot of attacks, because you're touching on something that the right has put forth as the boogeyman, as the thing to be afraid of. What kind of responses have you gotten from folks?
Well, thankfully, the overwhelming response has been positive, which people are saying, you know what, we do need to look at the past honestly. But so ratio-wise, it's good, but the inbox still fills up with people who say any conversation about race or racism is racist itself. The problem isn't talking about race and racism, of course. The problem is discriminating against people on the basis of race and racism. And, with the TED Talk, in which I say we have to confront the most difficult aspects of our past, I mean, it just is a reminder when I get those responses, when the email fills up and the voicemail fills up, that, you know what, it doesn't really matter what we say. There are those who are committed to making sure that we are divided along these issues of race, and that, and because talking about it should not be a problem. That's about understanding. But so sometimes Rick, I get this question a lot. Well, if people would just understand what critical race theory was, for example, it's just saying you got to take race and racism seriously when it comes to understanding the past and the present. If they would just take the time to understand it, then it shouldn't be a problem. And I was like, yeah, in theory, but they don't want to. That's the whole point, right? They don't want to.
Yeah.
It's politics and power, and they use that as a wedge to drive between everyday working class folks.
And race has been one of those things from the almost the founding of this country that we've been pitted against each other on. I mean, as a labor person, I understand full well how race has gone about making both white and black workers poorer at every turn. How during the Coal Wars they brought in convicts from Tennessee to break strikes. We know this is our history, yet I'm still confused on why we can't say this is our history.
Yeah, when we look back at it, and it predates. I mean, this is where that whole 1619 thing people get all upset about, right? I mean, it's just saying, look, this is when we literally began slavery in the colonies and what will become the United States. So it predates the founding. I mean, but racism in particular is the most powerful political organizing tool that we have in America. It has always been, because it does that very thing. It is used as a justification for the exploitation of large groups. It's been African Americans, Japanese Americans, Latinos, it doesn't matter. But it's also used to separate, to divide. Nobody benefits when you take one group of workers and then put them in a category that then lowers the wage floor. And so we know that, and we see it time and time again. The question then becomes, why do people lean into it? Why do people buy into it? And that's where you get into that dangerous conversation that really unnerves a lot of people on the right, and that is sort of this notion of white privilege, right? I mean, it's not that there is this very thing called white privilege, but it's not called white guarantee. Not everybody is guaranteed. No white folk are guaranteed to be successful in America solely because they're white. They just have the privilege of not having to deal with certain obstacles put in front of them because they are black and brown. And as soon as we understood that, as soon as we can wrap our minds around that, I think we'll all be in a better place. That, we're better off through solidarity than through division.
I'm right there with you. Now, here's my problem. I have so many people who have read the Glenn Beck books on history, the Bill O'Reilly books on history. Glenn Beck's, in his book, The Horse, was talking to George Washington, which is weird to me. But it comes down to, now, whose history are we going to talk about? You, as a history professor, at some point, do you have to look at the sources that are out there saying that none of this stuff happened? I had someone tell me the other day, masks, making them wear a mask was just like the Holocaust, and I'm going, I think we're missing the actual history that you're citing.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, as a trained historian, as a professional historian, we are committed to facts, right? And facts are not disputed, or shouldn't be disputed in certain I mean, interpretation, yes, but certain things are clear. And how do we know these sources, right? I mean, it's not just what somebody assumes happened in the past. It's what happened in the past that we can document. And so, when I get students from Southeast Ohio who've never had an African American history professor or a teacher before, and they come in, I know that I have to allow the voice of the people of the past to speak, because they won't hear what I'm trying to say. And so it's always primary sources. You want to know about the founders, all you got to do is, and the racism of the founders, all you got to do is read what they talked about, read what they wrote. Thomas Jefferson would never be quiet, right? He's always talking about these pseudo-scientific rationalizations for slavery. And, I wasn't talking about all people when I was talking about all men are created equal. You don't have to take my word for it. We look at the sources. You want to know about the primary cause of the Civil War and why, and we know that it was the institution of slavery. Just look at what those folk who succeeded said. That's all we have to do. And so yes, we shouldn't be arguing over things that didn't happen when we know what happened, because the source trail is there.
Yeah, no, ultimately, I think this is kind of my last line of questioning. Ultimately, the responsibility for educating our children falls on we the parents. And one of the things that we've tried to do is expose our kids to different things. I mean, we had the opportunity, thanks to I do this, to go to many of these museums and see a lot of the things and the horrible things that were done, from Tuskegee to the Emmett Till to all of these different things and this horrible stuff. What should parents do? Because I think most people that I talk to, most parents, they want their kids to get a full, well-rounded education. They wanted them to be able to critically think and to assess what our history is. What advice do you give them?
I say take your time to do some learning yourself, right? I mean, we all come through the same education system. And when it comes to questions of race in American society and racism in American society and U.S. history, it's really unlike any other subject. You go into a math class, there's not much unlearning that you have to do. But when you're talking about American history, there's a lot of unlearning that we all have to do before we can get down to the serious business of learning. And so I would lean into it with your kids and say, look, there's stuff I don't know that we have to figure out, that I didn't learn in the classroom, things that I used to call and names I used to use that I since learned are inappropriate. So let's learn together. Because in the end, what history is really all about, particularly the instruction of it, is yes, it's trying to get kids and young people and us to understand the past so that we can make sense of the present, because you can't understand the present unless you understand how we got here. But that's not the end. The end goal is the handoff, right? I mean, this football season is about to begin. We have to hand off this country, the world in which we live, to young people. And we have to prepare them as well to be able to answer, to solve the problems that we haven't solved, to resolve the mess that we're leaving them. And the only way that we can adequately prepare them, Rick, to do that is if they understand the present. You can't understand the present without understanding the past. And that's our charge, to prepare our children to inherit the world that we are leaving them. And to prepare them to do that, we got to talk honestly about the past.
And the hard part is, as you've said, you're going to have to go and evaluate the things that you learned. And I got to tell you, I was extremely fortunate that I had a number of very good history teachers over the years, where a lot of things that we've talked about and that have come up, we actually examined. And for me, it all comes down to having a good teacher who's going to bring good information and do it in an honest way. And I think this is where I think a lot of people are afraid that, we've been so trained to be distrustful of public education, that it's some, liberal conspiracy to educate our children to make them think. The hope is that we pick this up and we move it forward. But Hasan, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I hope folks will check out the TED Talk. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Good stuff. I appreciate it. Hasan Jeffries. Make sure you check out the TED Talk. We're going to get it out on social media. Make sure you check that out. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day striking Teamsters in Minneapolis defied martial law. They stopped scab trucks, forcing the release of their strike leaders. Armed with bayonets and machine guns, the National Guard had patrolled the streets for nearly a week. They seized scores of strikers and union leaders and threw them into military stockades. Drivers were outraged. They defied Governor Olson and Major General Walsh, who, on behalf of the Citizens Alliance and trucking bosses, were determined to break the strike. Soon after strikers were imprisoned, drivers began chasing scab trucks across the city. Multiple reports poured in of picketers forcing trucks to stop. Some unloaded their cargo onto bridges. Others chased, captured, and damaged the scab trucks. Strikers ripped ignition wires out, forced scabs from the wheel, and then disappeared before police and the National Guard could arrive to retaliate. In just 3 hours, strikers had overturned nearly 70 trucks. Unable to stop the superior force of striking drivers, Bill Brown, Vincent, and Miles Dunn were ordered unconditionally released from the military stockades. Now, employers, the governor, and other strike-breaking agencies were eager to propose peace to federal mediators. But they proposed to scrap the terms of their earlier May agreement. In response, the leaders of Local 574 issued a general strike call. In it, they asked, quote, "Is there one man so blind as not to see that if 574 is allowed to go down to defeat under the brutal hammering of military despotism, the whole labor movement of the city will have been dealt a mortal blow? Union men, brothers, sisters, fellow workers, what are you going to do about it? We appeal to you for solidarity." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Interesting guy, Hasan Jeffries. And look, make sure you take a look at the TED Talk. And like I said, there was a moment where he was talking about, touring Monticello and putting his hands on the bricks in the basement that had, the handprints of slaves in it and, what it meant to him. And it was, it's that kind of, this is actual history. This is something, that someone touched, a couple hundred years ago, and putting yourself in that place. It got me to thinking about our 2015 Civil Rights Tour. There were a bunch of those moments for me where we were, in places looking at things, being told about the horrors of a moment in time on the very ground where you're standing. We were in Durham, North Carolina, and at the historic Stagville plantation. And, this woman is walking us through this plantation where, and they if you ever have an opportunity, by all means, go there. But she's walking us through and she's explaining what's going on in the different places of the plantation. And we're seeing, the marks of the chains where they used to hang the slaves to hold, to punish them. We're seeing the homes that they lived in, and how they were built, and the homes of the white people on the other side of the fence, who were just poor and destitute and basically living outside, but still thought that they were better because they were white, but they were even poorer than the slaves were. And that push and pull. And we got this opportunity to go into a bunch of places, and like I said, it all sprung out of that conversation I had with my daughter about what'd you learn in school today. And we learned about Rosa Parks, Dad. I go, what'd you learn? Well, she sat in the front of the bus. Why? She was tired. Oh, that it? Only to find out. And again, I think I got a pretty decent education. I think I had some really good history teachers, some people who really were passionate about history. There were things about the Rosa Parks situation that I didn't even know. We visited Troy University, where they have a wonderful, if you ever get an opportunity, a wonderful Rosa Parks museum, where they went through the whole thing. I didn't realize, and this is one of those little things, Rosa Parks wasn't actually seated in the front of the bus. I learned she was seated in the front of the bus. She wasn't allowed to be in the front of the bus. Throw her off. Nope, she was actually in one of the front 3 rows of the middle of the bus, where they evidently cut the bus in half. The front half was for white people. Back half was for black people. But the first 3 rows of the black section, you could be thrown out of if the white section was full. I didn't know that. She was where she was supposed to be, and this driver, who she had had problems with in the past, threw her off the bus, and she's like, "No, I'm not going." And that began, the publicity part of it. She wasn't actually the face of the court case. She was the face of the PR campaign. And there was so much to this. When you, again, get into the history, the actual history, not the sound bites, not the snippets, not the what we think, not what we heard on YouTube, but actually talk to people who dedicate their lives to learning that history. You know, when I see talk radio hosts writing history books, I'm a little freaked out. You know, when you're getting the perspective of George Washington's horse, that's not really history. I'm not quite sure what source that came from. But the truth of the matter is we are, you know, we're a good capitalist society. We treated people really poorly. And now it's all horrible tourism. And, you know, as he said, Mississippi and Alabama are the ones who have done it the best. They have some fantastic museums. If you ever find yourself there, it's well worth going and looking at them because they have no problem documenting how horrible they were. In fact, there was one in Greensboro, North Carolina, where they had the lunch counter of the A&T 4, where the four kids wouldn't get off of the lunch counter, you know, demanding to be served, and they had things thrown at them. They were beaten up and spit on and all kinds of stuff. They have the original Woolworths counter, refinished and looking as it would have back then. Now you can't touch it or sit in it or anything like that, but you can see it. But the guy who was giving us the tour, former postal worker, you know, we had him take us down, and we got to, you know, do some things that you normally wouldn't be able to do because, you know, we got this really great personalized tour, and thank you to those folks. But we got to a section where the guy comes to me, he goes, you know, I'm going to bring my assistant down, and we're going to take your kids around to the other side. And I'm like, if you think that's best, you know your museum. By all means, I'm not going to question that. And when we walked into the room that they took us in, my stomach turned. I've seen some horrible things in my life. I've seen people beaten. I've seen people shot, stabbed. I've seen horrible stuff. Not like that. The pictures that they had, the images that were there, and thank goodness to this guy for saying, no, take the kids, because the kids were, you know, were younger and too young to see that kind of inhumanity. That's the history that we have to remember. Now, I know there are those who want to deny that bad things happen. I know we want the happy history, and I do too. Look, I want to think that on a certain level that we're exceptional. I want to believe that this country is an incredible experiment in democracy and self-rule. I want to believe that the founders had this vision for the future and gave us this platform that we can improve upon. This Constitution that can be changed and that can repair the wrongs. But you have to at least be able to admit it was flawed from the beginning, when only 21-year-old white landowning males could vote. That means everybody else was left out. When blacks were only 3/5 of a person. So, I mean, how do you deny that? And I have people who try and deny that happened. Now, I understand. This is where the discussion can happen. I do understand that there would never be a country. There would not have been a United States if those compromises weren't met. Were they bad compromises? Yes. They were horrible. But it was the only way you were bringing everybody together. And I got to think at the time when they were making the compromise that they had to know this is going to lead to conflict at some point. They had to know that this is going to have to resolve itself one way or another, and that a civil war was almost inevitable. At least that's how I learned it. That they knew, they made this compromise because it was the only way forward. Now we should have that discussion, whether that's accurate or not. We should have the ability to discuss that in schools. I want kids to learn that. This isn't about brainwashing our kids to think some kind of, some kind of horrible. This is about going, this is what's accurate. This is who we were. We can be better. Like our Constitution, we can change. I know there are some, my original intent folks, the Federalist Society folks, the people who want to go back to that original intent where, blacks are 3/5, women are, back in the kitchen not voting, and all the other horrible that had gone on, and return to the good old days of white landowning males over 21 being able to vote. Because if that were the case, this would be a much different country. This would be a much more harsh country. And this is what they keep telling us that they want. This is who the Republican Party is. And I'm often amazed that you get women to vote for a Republican anything when they basically have told us that this is what they want. This is what they believe in. Now, I believe in individualism. I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in fiscal responsibility. I believe in all those things, which is why I'm a liberal. Because I also believe in taking care of people. I also believe in helping, being part of a community. And what we're seeing, and this brings us to the present day. What we're seeing is this weird moment where it's all about me. This kind of selfishness. I threw out on Twitter today, give me 3 words that describes the current Republican Party. And none of the Republicans chimed in with good words. They just, that's all you do is call names. No, give me some words. Tell me who you are. Selfish, greedy kept coming up. Immature, dangerous. All of these words kept coming up because this is who the Republican Party has turned into. I want a vibrant GOP. I do. I want the party of Lincoln to come back and have some ideas. The party of Lincoln that fought to free the slaves? You remember that Republican Party? The Republican Party that believed in workers having the right to organize and join unions to increase the minimum wage. I want that Republican Party back. I don't want the January 6th Republican Party that we have. I don't want the party of Trump that we've had for far too long. I don't want it. Don't need it. Not good for us. It's not good for democracy. It's not good for the country. And what it's done is it, again, has divided us and back again to the race issue. We can't heal this country. We can't move forward until we deal with our original sin. And that is the race issue. Is it comfortable? No. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. But until you deal with it, admit it. It's kind of like that whole thing. You don't know you have a problem until you admit it. We need to admit it. Our history was riddled with problems. Identify what they are and move forward. Nobody is saying dwell on the past. Nobody is saying that at all. But you do have to identify it. You do have to recognize. Because, the weird thing for me is I know people who are fighting to maintain that kind of history, that sugar-coated Disney version. Christopher Columbus was here. He founded America, and he was seeking out America. He was seeking here. The truth of the matter is he was lost. He thought he was somewhere completely else and was a murderous thief. But we can't talk about that because that's who they were back then. That's how you got your treasure. And the thing for me is, by recognizing that, does it make him discovering the country or finding or stumbling or however he got here, does it make it any less important? No, not really. He still found it. That's something. But being honest about who he was, same thing with the founders. I knew that Thomas Jefferson had slaves back in high school. That was not news to me. I have met people that's news. That all of them had them. And some of them, upon their death, freed them. I think Washington was one. But most of them didn't because they were property. And that was the time. We can admit that, can't we? Can we admit that and still think that they gave us something really important? Or is it not possible? Is it not possible to look at them as flawed human beings who did something really good? Or do they have to be, and this comes from my religious friends, do they have to be the right hand of God himself? Are these the third, fourth, and fifth comings? Are these the people with divine intentions? I know my C Street friends would probably go, no, they were chosen. These were men of their time. And this is my problem with the cancel culture and the wokeness that we see. I understand the time that these people lived in and what was the norm. You don't go back and cancel all that. We educate ourselves and we commit to not do those things. We progressively get better, smarter. Now, will there be pains going forward? Sure, there's going to be. But learning actual history, I just want my kids to learn history. That's what it is. I don't want propaganda. I don't want someone's ideology. I want actual history. On either side. I want my kids, when they graduate from high school and go into college, I want them to be critical thinkers. I want them to understand, and I tell my kids this all the time. My generation, knowledge was power. The more you could learn, the more that you could retain, the faster you could recall it, the better off you did. With these smartphones and the Google and all the stuff, the unlimited amount of information that's out there, this generation's, their importance is critically thinking and evaluating sources quickly, knowing what to believe, what not to believe. And I think that's how we've gotten into this mess that we're in right now. There's a media culture in this country that understands the education level of the average American is probably around an 8th or 9th grade education. And if you just keep feeding them nonsense, they're gonna grab onto it. You know, I look at all these right-wing news outlets who that's their goal. Their stated intention is misinformation. Ideological misinformation. And anything that remotely comes close to being critical thinking, having any critical theory, whether it's about race or health or anything else, that's the devil. That's to be afraid of. Anytime you put critical and theory in any sentence, they're going to run, screaming for the hills because it's all bad. Very interesting times we live in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. The year was 1877. That summer, during what came to be known as the Great Upheaval, police, the U.S. Army, and the National Guard brutally crushed a national railroad strike. The simmering anger of working people had many elected officials and industrialists on edge. One man saw the labor unrest as a business opportunity. And on this day in labor history, the treasurer of the Gatlin Gun Company wrote a letter to the president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad with a proposal. He wrote, "We have the honor to suggest that you strengthen yourself now against such emergencies in the future by providing yourselves with Gatlin guns. 4 or 5 men only are required to operate it, and one Gatling with a full supply of ammunition can clear a street or track and keep it clear. The 6-barrel hand-cranked weapon could fire 200 bullets a minute. Upgrades to the gun soon had it cranking out an astonishing 600 bullets a minute. This ferocious new weapon set its sights on the cause of labor. In 1878, in Cleveland, Ohio, 25 prominent citizens formed the Cleveland Gatlin Gun Battery to deal with labor uprisings. Armed with 2 of the new guns, the militia drilled and held social events, but never fired the gun against workers. Militias from San Francisco to Connecticut, from Kansas to Pennsylvania, likewise armed themselves. Perhaps the place where the gun became most infamously used against labor was in the Colorado mining wars. In 1914, a Gatlin-type gun mounted on an armored car was used to shoot up a workers' tent city in Ludlow.
Pavlichenko, well known to fame, Russia's your country, fighting.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith
For
Show.
all time to come, 300 Nazis fell by your gun.
At least since the invention of the wheel, people have fixed, tinkered with, and improved every device they've possessed. It's been a human right. But after several thousand years, suddenly legal clauses are being tucked in purchase agreements saying that today's owners of products must not even peek, much less poke inside, the inner workings of our devices. Makers of anything with a computer chip in it, everything from your car to your toothbrush, have been especially vehement about this, rewriting human nature by outlawing our right to repair. Yes, they assert, you own the thing, but we own the intangible ideas that make it work. So if the product malfunctions, you must return it to us and pay us a premium to repair it. Plus, they prattle, you could hurt yourself trying to do it yourself, so trust us. Bovine excrement, barks Steve Wozniak. Companies inhibit your rights so they can have power, control over everything. Is he some consumer radical? No, Wozniak is the co-founder of Apple, the multi-billion-dollar global Goliath that is the world's biggest producer of consumer electronics. He's appalled that Apple has now become a fierce opponent of self-repair. He says we wouldn't have had an Apple except that early innovators like him grew up in a very open technology world. From the start, he points out, openness helped spread innovation and consumer demand. So, why stop the self-repair community, he asks? 2 big reasons. Besides letting corporations lock in monopoly profits from the repair industry, it also dissuades customers from bothering with repairs. Just throw the thing away and buy a new one. This is Jim Hightower saying, if you wonder where such massive, deadly levels of pollution by lead, mercury, plastic, etc. come from, look to the gross throwaway ethic of big tech profiteers like Apple. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a little bit of divide on the right, at least in the media space, because Alex Jones evidently today, and I don't like talking about Alex Jones. I've met him a couple of times. Actually had a really nice long conversation with him once when he was somewhat sane and lucid. But now he's throwing Donald Trump under the bus. Called him a dumb you know what, because Donald Trump did the unthinkable. Told the people in Alabama, in Cullman, Alabama, to go get vaccinated because he got vaccinated and it was good. This is now Trump saying that the left has gotten a hold of Donald Trump and it's all bad. I can't wait to see how this plays out because there are so many Trump supporters that I know who are also anti-vaxxers, the ones who refuse under any circumstances. So it'll be interesting to see now that and I've been saying this for a while, Trump's been vaccinated for a while, but now that Alex Jones has made a big deal about this, going to be interesting to see how my slack-jawed, mouth-breathing friends are going to take this. Going to be interesting. I'm here to share some thoughts on, where we go. Now that Trump has come out officially and said go get vaccinated, I've asked Billy Ray to come talk with us. Billy is one of Hollywood's greatest. He has the Oscar-nominated screenwriter, Captain Phillips, The Hunger Games, my favorite, The Comey Rule on Showtime. If you haven't seen it, you must. Billy, thanks for taking time for us.
It's always fun to be here. Thank you.
So what do you think of Alex Jones now saying Trump's completely off his rocker? The left has gotten to him.
Well, if you go back to the basic assumption that Trump was never the problem, Trump was always the symptom, right? The problem was something else. And the problem is a disease that Alex Jones is still suffering from. And if you think of it in those terms, as long as Trump was useful to Alex Jones, then Alex Jones would, be in Trump's camp. And when Trump starts saying things that are counter to Alex Jones's fantasy, then all of a sudden Trump becomes incredibly dispensable. What's under all of this is just a protection of culture and protection of whiteness. Those things mean more to Alex Jones and his listeners than Donald Trump ever possibly could. When Donald Trump was the staunch defender of those things, great. As soon as he's not, as soon as he steps out of line, then they'll find someone else to worship.
Yeah, is this a big deal, you think?
Yeah, I do. I actually do, because what the right has become is built on quicksand. Its foundation is lies. It's all dishonesty. That can't stand for very long. And right now we're seeing that the Trump presidency didn't last forever, just like the Confederacy didn't last forever. And I think you're going to see some real fissures in it, some real cracks appearing now.
Yeah, especially as people keep getting sick and dying. I saw this story today coming out of South Dakota, and immediately I'm remembering when Kristi Noem rides into Sturgis, literally riding on a horse, flying a flag, and here we are 2 weeks later, the largest 2-week spike in COVID, 230% increase is happening there because guess what? Stupid came to town.
That's right. Look, at its core, okay, well, let's go back to numbers that always demonstrate something, right? If you look at the number of January 6th rioters that have been arrested thus far, I think that number is like 550. Most of them did not come from Trump counties. They actually came from Biden counties. Over half came from Biden counties. But what all those counties have in common is that in those counties, whites as a percentage of the population are dropping. Take Collin County, just north of Dallas, disproportionate number of rioters arrested from that one county. In Collin County, whites as a percentage of the population have dropped by 4.3% in just 5 years. That's a pretty staggering demographic shift in something the size of a county.
Right.
That means that those people who sense that their status, their caste as the dominant group of individuals in a given demographic area, when they feel that starting to drop, it makes them terrified. And so they go and do things like insurrection and rioting at the Capitol. That kind of mindset was never about Donald Trump. Donald Trump wrote it. He catalyzed it. He certainly weaponized it, but it was not actually about him. It was about something that goes much, much deeper. And that's what Kristi Noem is speaking to. And of course, it supersedes fact and it supersedes science. And even sick kids aren't enough to jar it from the number one position in people's minds if they are of that particular belief set. But we're now approaching 70% vaccination in this country. And more importantly, vaccinated people represent over 80% of the economy in this country. That's ultimately going to make the difference. When Disney World decides that it's in their best interest to make sure that everybody's vaccinated, well, then people are just going to have to get vaccinated.
Right.
LSU, hardly a bastion of liberal thinking, is now saying you can't come to a football game unless you're vaccinated or have proof of a negative test. What we're finding is that the economics of not being vaccinated are going to make it impossible at a certain point for Americans to live the lives they want to live.
Yeah, no, I mean, eventually this was always going to be what was going to happen. The capitalists and the money interests are going to be the ones who are going to drive this. And because look, they don't want to keep losing money forever. And they don't want to keep shutting businesses down because especially now as we're seeing this spike happen because we have people who didn't do the right thing from the beginning.
That's right. Ultimately, although Republicans don't want to believe it, Democrats are capitalists. Democrats are full-throated capitalists. They believe in smart capitalism. They don't believe in, a tax break that gives 83% of its benefits to the richest 1% of the country. They're not that kind of capitalist, but they're capitalists. And ultimately, what's right for capitalism is solving COVID. And what solves COVID is vaccines and masks.
Yep.
It's really not that complicated.
It's not. And I don't know how you explain that to people who refuse to listen. Look, I hate wearing a mask as much as anyone does.
Of course.
Everyone I know hates doing it, and yet you do it because you have to.
That's right. Jerry Jones is saying we have to now put aside the I and start thinking about the we. What I keep thinking about, and this was not my metaphor, I read it somewhere. If you go back to 1940 London, when it was being bombed every night by the Germans, there was this rule that everyone had to turn their lights out. And you did that to save your own life and to save the life of your neighbors, right? Can you imagine someone in the middle of London with the German bombers flying overhead, turning on their light and saying, it's a personal choice? Can you imagine that? You could hear the bombs dropping, right? The entire street would be blown apart. That is not a personal choice. But I read a poll literally this morning that said, here was the question. Does my freedom entitle me to endanger your health? Okay. 88% of Democrats said no. But only 21% of Republicans said no. That's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Nothing polls higher in America as a value than freedom. Freedom outpolls justice by 22 percentage points, which is pretty massive. The genius of the gun debate was that it stopped being a health issue and started being a freedom issue. Once it becomes a freedom issue, that's it. You know where that's going to wind up. And now COVID has become a freedom issue as well, instead of a health issue for a select group of Americans. And they will hold on to their freedom for as long as they can.
Until they're on their last leg, and then remarkably, without question, all of them turn around and go, "No, go get vaccinated, go do it."
Right. So my pitch on this one, and I would love to have the opportunity to see how your friends who are Trump supporters, who are still riding the trucks with the F Biden flags, how they would agree to this. Okay, you don't want a vaccine. Okay, fine. Will you sign this waiver that says that if you or your family get COVID, you will not go to the hospital and burden our health system? Yes or no?
I've been asking that for a very long time.
But that's fair.
And here's the thing. Overwhelmingly, they say yes. Because they believe it's all a hoax. They believe that they're not going to get it, that it's something over there, and that they're invincible. The one masterful thing that the right has done is they've propped up this self-worth, this self-reliance, this invincibility cloak, if you will, that their minions believe they have, until they don't, until they're on their deathbed, just about ready to hit the ventilator, and then the attitude changes.
Right. Remember in war, they say there are no atheists in a foxhole, right? Okay. Same thing here. There are no anti-vax conspiracists in an ICU. There just aren't any, right? So this guy, Phil Valentine, I think that's his name. He was the radio guy in Tennessee.
Yep.
Okay. Anti-vaxxer until he got it, until he got COVID and died. Well, what did that guy cost me? I don't know. The average cost of a COVID health hospital stay is $77,000. Okay. I got to figure his was more since he stayed there until the moment of his death. So what did he cost me? What did he cost you? What did he cost Tennessee by taking the stance that he took? I mean, it's great that he found religion at the end and advised people to get the vaccine, but he cost all of us. He drained the system.
Yeah. And I would argue it's worse than even that. I would argue he cost us millions because as we discussed last night, the reality is it's not just about him. How many, tens, hundreds, how many thousands, how many people did he influence to not get the vaccine, and they ended up in the very same place?
That's, of course, very, very good point, because he was an influencer. So again, it comes back to, does my freedom stop when I am now endangering your health? And it's just a divide between how people look at it.
No, I mean, it's, and you go back to Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who said, you can flail your fist around until your fist touches the tip of my nose. It's the exact same thing. You have the right to do whatever you want until your right somehow infringes on mine.
By the way, it is a matter of settled law in America right now that the United States government, if they so choose, can vaccinate people against their will. That has been a settled matter of law for 100 years.
Yeah, see, I'm really uncomfortable with that, though.
I am too. And I don't believe for a second that the Supreme Court today would uphold that law. And I don't believe for a second that the United States government would ever enforce that law. No. That's not the point. The point is that there was a moment in American history where it became so clear because of yellow fever or whatever the disease of the moment was, that there was a greater public good that was being endangered, that, forgive the expression, trumped someone's individual liberty. Again, the government has never once used that. They have never operated under that law, but the law does exist.
No, I understand that, and I'm not in favor of it, but I get your point. I did want to get your thoughts on, because this has not been a great week for Biden. The polling numbers are down a little bit, and the right's jumping. They're foaming at the mouth at how gleeful they are. And like I said earlier, I think the reality is all the stuff that Biden's dealing with right now, we're outside of his control. The virus. Problem is, we've got a bunch of slack-jawed mouth breathers who, they're going to defiantly do what they can do to make things worse, and that's where we are now. And I look at Afghanistan, the withdrawal. I think Biden is doing the right thing, moving forward on the withdrawal. We should have been out of there years ago, and I think history will remember him well for this. But in this moment, there's a little bit of chaos going on, and something that I don't want to see. But I think it's the right move to get out.
It's absolutely the right move to get out. They have now gotten, I think, 70,000 people out in the last, I don't know how many days. But it's been an incredible airlift, like kind of spectacular in its efficiency. It started more slowly than any of us wanted to. And yeah, there's a legitimate question to be asked. Should that airlift have happened before the Taliban took over the country? And yeah, that's a legitimate debate, as I said. But the point is, they're getting the people out that we need to get out. It's easy for Kayleigh McEnany to sit back and say there wasn't crisis after crisis in Donald Trump's presidency. That is so starkly, patently untrue. It doesn't really require an answer. Biden's poll numbers took a hit this week. If anyone can point out to me why that makes a difference to anybody, I'm open to hearing the explanation for that one. We're now in, mid-August of a non-election year. Who cares what his numbers are? It wouldn't matter if his numbers were 90. That's just not the payoff window. And the American public, as we know, is hugely fickle. I will tell you right now, I would bet $1 million that if Donald Trump ran for president again against Joe Biden today, he'd get his ass kicked. America has moved on Donald Trump. Independents now, undecided independents who decide every election, among that group, which is 26% of all independents, Donald Trump is radioactive. Inside that group, his approval is at 20, his disapproval is at 67. So those are the numbers that matter to me.
Right. But, I look at what's going on in Afghanistan, and again, there's a lot of blame to go around. I personally want to go back and investigate from the beginning every one of those things that we neglected to look into over the last 20 years. I want people held accountable. I want the people who got rich off of it held accountable. I want a lot of things. But I'm looking at this moment. This moment was all set in motion by Donald Trump and the last administration. And I think we eventually have to look into that as well. But, to blame Biden for this solely is political. I mean, it's the game, isn't it?
Well, sure. In 1968, Walter Cronkite, who was the anchor of CBS News, went to Vietnam, came home and said that the Vietnam War was unwinnable. And at that moment, Lyndon Johnson said, I've lost the country. If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country. Okay, so there was this one voice, this one set of facts that everybody agreed upon was truth, right? And we don't have that in America.
Yeah, we're
right
not
now.
that country.
We choose the news that agrees with us, right? The people who are tuning in to listen or watch you are people that agree with you. And they tune in because they want to be validated on a regular basis by what you have to say. Well, someone who disagrees with you would go listen to some other podcast, right? So the people who are listening to some other podcast right now are probably having a pretty good night watching Biden's numbers. But they're going to have a rough night when Biden's numbers go back up, which is inevitable because the two crises that are hurting him right now, COVID inherited and Afghanistan inherited, and all he's done is try to solve both. As I agree with you completely, history is going to judge him very, very well on both, I think.
Yeah. Now were there mistakes? Sure, but again, you play the hand you're dealt, and I think, as you pointed out, they've done the smart thing. They've basically commandeered a number of airline jets, and we're flying people out. Now the question becomes, how do you deal with the voices that right now are going, no, we should have stayed, Billy. We should send more troops. We should double down. We can't lose this now. It's been 20 years.
I don't take anyone seriously if they're talking about that. Look, what got us in this in the first place? Dick Cheney went on Sunday morning talk shows to defend the proposed invasion of Afghanistan. On every talk show, he was asked, okay, but what's the cost in terms of men, material, and money? And he broke the frame. Every time he was asked that question, he rejected the premise of the question. He said, what's the cost of not going? And that's how he won that debate. And that's why W was able to invade Afghanistan. Also, a major international coalition that went in, countries that one by one realized this is a complete losing proposition. We're getting the hell out.
And I think the American people, I think a lot of people, and I remember at this time, because I was against it from the beginning, have been against the whole, all of our misadventures overseas, almost my entire life. But I remember at the time people thinking this was going to be just like the first Gulf War. We were going to go in. It was going to be a couple weeks. We'd have the parades. It would be great. We'd win and shock and awe, and it'd be amazing. We could watch it on CNN, pop a little popcorn. It was going to be great. It hasn't been that. It's been 20 years of, us not really sacrificing or suffering, especially since our only call to action was to go shopping.
Look, the history of Afghanistan is littered with the bones of foreign countries that tried to go in there and impose their will on that particular piece of geography. It can't be done.
Right.
It can't be done. Great countries have tried. Afghanistan was always a dumb idea. But if you look at what the real purpose of it was to get Al-Qaeda on the run because we were reeling from 9/11. On that level, you could call it a success.
We did what we were supposed to do, and that's when we should have gotten out. But now what do you say to the people who are going to follow that up? They're going to follow it up with, okay, we did what we were supposed to do. We beat Al-Qaeda, but now we're going to give them another safe haven with the Taliban back in charge.
And that may very well be, and there may be problems coming down the line that we're not anticipating at this point. I don't know. Maybe the Taliban wasn't the problem. Maybe Al-Qaeda was the problem, and the Taliban just left alone won't be an issue for us. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert. What I know is we couldn't stay there forever, and the money that we were spending there was ungodly. And we have proven time and again, we're not in the business of nation building. So yes, one president had to have the guts to get us out, and this one did. Of course, he's going to pay a short-term political price for it.
Yeah, and like I've been saying, I think history will remember this well. Lastly, I want to get your thoughts on Herschel Walker. He has now announced, I guess, he's running for Senate in Georgia. I don't know how he's going to do that living in Texas, but the guy who lives in Texas is now going to run for Senate in Georgia. And Trump back in March was like, "Run, Herschel, run." Yeah. Thoughts on a Herschel Walker candidacy?
He's God's great gift to Raphael Warnock and the Democratic Party. He's tailor-made, perfect. If you want Raphael Warnock to stay in office, then by all means, Republicans support Herschel Walker. That's a great idea. He's got zero chance in a general election. Zero.
Zero? Come on, everybody's got at least a little chance.
No chance.
Why do you say that?
Have you heard him talk? There are no ideas there, right? There isn't a governing impulse there. There isn't a plan.
Yeah, but Tommy Tuberville is in the Senate right now, and I've heard him talk.
Point well taken. I retract everything I just said.
This is where, again, I've had that thrown at me before, and I'm going, yeah, but the Republican Party, they don't care. It's all about the game, man. And Herschel Walker, the thought is that he's going to pull some African American votes because he's a football guy. I like Herschel Walker. I liked when he played.
That's true, and he very well might. But what people really don't want is chaos. That's the thing that makes conservatives conservative, is their shared fear of chaos. I don't think Herschel Walker is going to represent order and governance to them. I think he's going to represent chaos, and I think they've had enough.
I'm hoping you are right, and hopefully we keep the Senate, and because I think next year is going to be a rough year. But Billy, I appreciate the time and your expert thoughts. It's always good having you on the program. Hope you'll come back and talk with us again real soon.
I'd love to. It's always a pleasure.
Good stuff. Billy Ray, make sure you check out the work he does. The Comey Rule is incredible. Also Captain Phillips and The Hunger Games, my kids' favorite movies. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
It was like a tidal wave that just came over the road and into my yard and swept my house away.
Unprecedented storm in Tennessee shatters rainfall records, triggers deadly flooding. Tropical storm Henri breaks rainfall records, cancels Barry Manilow.
What?
The Montreal Protocol saved the ozone layer and bought us time on global warming. Plus,
a couple of days ago, it rained at the summit of Greenland.
Scientists shocked at first ever rain at Greenland's highest point.
All of those no longer shocking stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Captain Planet, the world is on fire.
Oh, now you're concerned. I've been warning you for decades. Now beat it, I'm trying to forget.
But we need you to save the planet. We still have a chance.
Huh? Did you read the UN report? We're screwed. By the way, anyone know Elon Musk? I want to catch the next rocket out of this fire trap.
This is your Green News Report.
My advice is drink heavily and wait for the sweet darkness to come.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I'm telling you, we're going to look back at this as the summer of climate change 2021. It has been bad. I don't remember anything like this in the past.
Yes, it's really remarkable. Record-shattering rainfall in Tennessee on Saturday triggered catastrophic sudden flash floods that killed at least 22 people, with about 10 still listed as missing as we go to air. In Hayes County, 17 inches of rain fell in just 24 hours, triple what was forecast, breaking the previous state record by 3 inches. Fast-rising floods swept buildings off their foundations, destroyed roads and bridges, knocked out electricity and communications. It was the second major flood event in Tennessee this year alone. Nashville was hit by deadly floods back in March.
Or just another day in climate-changed America.
In the Northeast, Tropical Storm Henri made landfall on the coast of Rhode Island on Sunday, knocking out electricity to hundreds of thousands and also causing extensive flooding from Pennsylvania to Maine. Henri also canceled that big Welcome Back New York City concert in Central Park, which was good because shortly after, the storm broke Central Park's record for the most rainfall in a single hour since record-keeping began in the 1800s. Barry Manilow was canceled mid-song, but he somewhat ironically picked it up over cell phone on CNN.
I made it through the rain. I kept my world protected. I made it through the rain.
Now, because Henri is such a slow and sprawling storm system, it will continue drenching the inland northeast for days, hampering recovery efforts and threatening further flooding in areas where the ground is already saturated from a wet summer. Now, that's 2 record-breaking extreme rainfall events in just 48 hours in the U.S., 1,000 miles apart. Both are examples of the same phenomenon. Human-caused climate change is supercharging extreme rainfall events, which scientists warn will become more common as the burning of fossil fuels warms the planet further.
On the other hand, it did cancel Barry Manilow.
That's because a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, about 7% more water for every 1 degree Celsius of warming. NOAA studies show that heavy downpours in the eastern U.S. have increased roughly 50% since the 1970s. President Biden, in remarks on Sunday, urged all Americans to get prepared before weather disasters strike.
You mean like 20 years ago?
And to everyone across the country, don't get caught by the next storm. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated now. Protect yourself and your family against COVID-19. It's going to be a vital part of emergency preparedness this year, for the remainder of this year.
Because when you're sheltered, hiding from the latest disaster, you're going to want to be immune from the previous disaster.
Exactly. Also, in yet another signal of how climate change is affecting every part of the planet, Greenland saw rain instead of snow at the 2-mile-high summit of its ice sheet for the first time on record. Temperatures at the summit over the weekend rose above freezing for the 3rd time in less than 10 years. It was also the heaviest rainfall event on the ice sheet since record-keeping began in 1950. The amount of ice lost on Sunday was 7 times higher than the average for this time of year.
Because the rain melts the ice.
Yep. Finally, some good news.
Yay.
Remember the Montreal Protocol? The first ever global climate treaty signed in 1987. It saved the ozone layer. Turns out it was even more successful than thought. It phased out chemicals known as HFCs and CFCs used in refrigeration and air conditioning, which are also powerful greenhouse gases. A new study has found that phasing those out also bought us some time on the climate crisis by avoiding, quote, a catastrophic collapse of forests and croplands, which would have added billions more tons of carbon to the atmosphere. The treaty kept global temperatures from rising an additional 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century.
You're welcome. For more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Natalie tweeted out yesterday, Amazonians, have you ever been interrogated by HR or management without a witness or legal union representative for defending yourself or a coworker? She says, I have many times. We deserve due process. We deserve unions. The argument she's making here is to expand what are known as Weingarten Rights, which means in the workplace, it's kind of like Miranda in the workplace. If you're going to be questioned about something that you could be disciplined or discharged for, you have the right to have a representative in the union setting. It's always been one of those things that I've said most certainly have a witness. Management always has a witness. Workers should too. They're wanting to go back to the days where non-union members had the same kind of ability. And when I thought of this, I'm like, I got to get the world's best labor law professor to come and share some thoughts with us. And that's why I've asked our good friend Paul Secunda to come back and give us some thoughts. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, if you compliment me, Rick, I'll come back all the time.
Walk me through this. I mean, let's start with first, what are the Weingarten Rights? I mean, most people have never heard of this. Most workers don't know what it is. If you're a union member, you should know what your Weingarten Rights are, but I don't think most people know.
Yeah, so Weingarten Rights are based on a Supreme Court decision, United States Supreme Court decision from 1975, where the Supreme Court recognized that when you're talking about the Section 7 right under the National Labor Relations Act to engage in concerted activity for mutual aid and protection, concerted activity includes the ability to help your fellow employee when that employee is being subjected to a disciplinary interview by the employer. You can work in a concerted way to protect yourself from arbitrary, unfair, discriminatory types of actions being taken against you. And, you know, historically, it's true that if you have a representative there to witness what is happening to you and to perhaps bring to life some of the provisions of the collective bargaining contract, it's less likely that you're going to be treated unfairly. So that was first developed in 1975 for union employees, but shortly thereafter, it was figured out that, hey, this is a Section 7 right, and Section 7 rights don't just apply to those who are organized in a union, they also apply to other types of situations. They apply to non-union employees who are also, you know, trying to protect themselves. The Section 7 right doesn't say it only applies to unionized employees. It doesn't even say it applies to employees who are trying to organize themselves into a union. It says it applies to all employees. So the same Section 7 right that applies to union members under Weingarten was extended in a number of cases over the 70s and 80s and 90s to non-union employees. It's gone back and forth, Rick. Over a 23-year period between 1981 and 2004, they had different boards depending upon if they were dominated by Republican appointees versus Democratic appointees, went back and forth. The last back and forth that occurred was in 2000 under the Clinton board in a case called Epilepsy Foundation. They applied the Weingarten rights to non-union members so they could have witnesses, representatives in disciplinary interviews. But in 2004, in what I told my labor law students for many years was one of the worst board decisions by either party that I've ever had the misfortune of reading, in the IBM case in 2004, they took away the Weingarten rights. And I'll tell you something, the rationale was bizarre. Remember, this was right after 9/11, and they said because of security concerns and sensitive information concerning terrorism and other types of security concerns, we can't let non-union workers have representatives. I don't know about you, Rick, but that's one of the most bizarre rationalizations I've ever heard. And yet that's what Chairman Batista depended on in 2004. So fast forward 17 years later now to 2021, we're about to see the beginning of the Biden board. And we have a new general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, and she has said quite clearly and expressly that she has a number of initiatives where she wants to overturn bad decisions by the Trump board. And one of those that she has identified for changing the law is re-extending these Weingarten rights for representation to non-union employees.
No, and I think it's a good thing, but I'll tell you, my initial reaction was, you know, this is the reason you join unions. I mean, this is part of the union structure. You know, as someone who was a steward for 15 years, I have been a part of, you know, hundreds of these investigatory meetings. I've been, you know, I know them backwards, forwards. And in fact, you know, the Trump board did something horrible during their terms in changing the representative and management relationship to, I forget the words they used, to one of, you know, cordial respect or some nonsense along those lines.
Yeah.
Where you can't, you know, hit your hand on the desk or even raise your voice because that would be disrespectful.
Correct. And so you're right. There's always a tension when non-union workers have Section 7 rights. It's not just, of course, here with these Weingarten rights. You know, people are starting on social media to claim that they're working in tandem to improve the conditions in the workplace. That's concerted activity for mutual aid and protection. They should have Section 7 rights. The number of unfair labor practices that are being brought by individual employees not in a union have skyrocketed. One of the things that I have done over the past few years is a number of labor law publications, both casebooks and treatises. And we have actually, as casebook authors, added an entire section just on the Section 7 rights of individual employees. And so you're right, it kind of brings up the question,